there are people saying, "Oh, we're really pleased that Lewis, he showed George the way, put him in his place," and then in the same breath, we'll say, "Yeah, but Verstappen should have had a penalty in Brazil." It's like, no, they both should have had a penalty. Let's be frank here.
It looks from the outside like George is willing to play the team game, not exclusively but most frequently when it suits him. What George feels like he's doing is what the banks did in 2008. They were happy to privatise their gains, the profits, and socialise their losses.
It goes to show that Mercedes need to sort out their deliberation. They need to be firmer in their decisions, because if Toto Wolff from his hospital bed is having to make a call post knee surgery and go, "For God's sake, guys, sort it out," that doesn't speak well, and that worries me about Mercedes going forward.
It's the fact that Red Bull so openly want to court him as a teammate to Max Verstappen, and the fact that Max himself is kind of, yeah, I'd be happy to have Lando in the car next to me. In fact, I'll be really happy to have Lando in the car next to me. What does that tell you about how Max rates him and his ability to take the fight to him?
And I think, unlike Aston Martin, who did their usual tracing paper trick, McLaren have taken the time to understand their concept better than Aston Martin did. And that is why they're now reaping the benefits of it. So much so that I think if there is a team best placed to challenge Red Bull next year, it's not Mercedes, it's McLaren.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown. With me as always, my co-host, my brethren, Baxty and Shez. How are we doing, chaps?
Good. Doing good.
It doesn't matter how you're doing. I had to do it in the ASMR style, of course, since I get criticised so often for whispering into the mic with the plosives. Suzuka was a bit techie, wasn't it, lads? Should we get straight into it in order? Got to talk about Mercedes first, haven't we? That's what's been popping off on Twitter, and that is what everybody's been arguing about. So go on then, set the table. Lewis Hamilton fans around the world are baying for George Russell's blood on account of him effecting very cheeky team orders. Not even team orders, that's wrong. I don't want to mischaracterise it because this is important. Trying to influence or wield influence from within the cockpit, let's say. Shez, I'll come to you first, bruv. How did you characterise George, what he said over the radio, and would you have done any different as an F1 driver?
Yeah, good question. First of all, great race. There were some really fun moments between George and Lewis. Obviously, there's a huge amount to talk about, and I guess that the relationship between those two in that race was split into two halves. What happened at the beginning, and their skirmishes there, and then how it all culminated in what happened at the end. And it's difficult to separate those two things out, I think. George was obviously on a completely different strategy to Lewis. Why that happened, I think, were for two different reasons. One, because George had suggested it, which I'm sure the strategists on the Mercedes pit wall were very happy that he did. And second, because of the outcome, which meant that both those two drivers weren't on the same bit of tarmac for the whole race, because that I think would have ended in tears for one or both of them. So I think that worked out pretty well. But I think we can all agree here that the prime strategy was the two stop.
Just a little bit, mate. Just a tad.
So George, I think, was always going to find himself ultimately. I guess he didn't know that at the point that he made that call, but ultimately he was always going to be on a hiding to nothing. And I mean, I've been thinking about this for most of today, having watched the race a little bit delayed. But the way I see how that all played out, I think George, once his tyres were going off, I think he probably should have realised that his role in this was to maximise the team's position relative to the Ferraris. And how could he have done that? Well, one was to hold up Charles Leclerc as much as he could, which I thought actually he did all right. He actually did hold up Charles for a few laps, and made it really difficult to get past him. But then Charles ultimately did get past. That's okay. But his next job, if the aim is to get ahead of as many Ferraris as possible, would have been to immediately let Lewis past. Because for me, you've done the hard work by holding up Charles. What you don't want to then do is ruin the quicker drivers' tires, chasing you, trying to pull out lines, moves, whatever, that then mean one, you run out of tires, and two, you run out of laps to try and catch the guy in front. And at the same time, put you in danger of being overtaken by the guy behind.
So, nailed it, bruv. I feel like you've jumped a couple steps. Baxty, tell me how you read and characterised that performance from George Russell. Would you have done exactly the same as he did?
I don't blame him for wanting to do what he did at the end with the DRS. I think it was clever thinking and shows that he was kind of aware of what had happened last week and thinking that he might be able to do it again. I think the big mistake that George made was going on that one stop. But I don't blame him for wanting to do it. Everyone was accusing him of not playing the team game. I'm like, no, he was literally saying he would hand over the position to Lewis on the last lap. But I think at the time I thought, oh, that's a smart call. But then actually George's tyres were completely fried. And I think it would have meant that would have left them more vulnerable to Sainz, I think. Whereas actually Mercedes made the right call and made them switch. I think where I got annoyed at George was when he said, well, Lewis forced me off, so he owes me one. It's like, well, he doesn't owe you anything. Yeah, that's a bit naughty. I get visor down, things get said, but just we called George a thinking driver. That he wasn't thinking there. That was poor. That was heat of the moment stuff. But yeah, I thought Lewis was lucky not to get a penalty for forcing George off, or at least get a slap on the wrist for. I'm pleased he didn't, because you want to see hard racing, and we don't want it to be overly sanitized. So it was nice that it wasn't penalising compared to some of the racing we saw, across the Grand Prix. I can understand why George was annoyed about that, but that's racing for you, and he should know that.
This is F1. Go on then, let's divide and conquer, lads, because there are far too many strands and threads at which we can pull. Overtake one, very Senna and Prost-esque. Were we both happy with that into the chicane before the back straight? No qualms with that.
I have no qualms with it. So when I did sorry for a little bit of, I did a video on Lewis and George on my channel, and
which isn't a bad channel, by the way. Go and check that out. Baxty F1.
Thank you very much. Somebody said, "Oh, Russell doesn't do overtakes. He can't overtake. He's not got it." I'm like, sorry, go and watch that race and watch that overtake he pulled on Lewis, because that was a great move. Nobody really would have considered it, and I think it blows open to anyone who thought George Russell can't overtake, even though they must not have watched Sakir 2020 either.
You know what? It's a sick overtaking manoeuvre, Baxter, but try and pull that manoeuvre on Max Verstappen into that chicane, and you're going to get a completely different outcome. I feel like Lewis was a more than willing participant with that. In fact, he was he very much aided and abetted. Right, he was more than a willing dance partner. I think any other driver on that grid, not named Lewis Hamilton, and not the other driver on the opposite side of the grid, probably doesn't allow George to get down there. Go on, Shez.
But I was going to say, most other drivers wouldn't then pull the move that Lewis did into turn one straight after. I mean, I think he knew that's what he was going to do as soon as he got overtook, right? And there was just something about Lewis this weekend, something that Singapore, I think, really stung him, right? Really made him feel a bit like annoyed. And he came here with like a different sense of purpose. He just wasn't, was he?
No, he wasn't having it, bro.
From the second he qualified ahead of George on Saturday to the way he took him into turn one after he got overtaken, there was
assertive.
Russell was never going to be ahead of him at the end of that race.
Assertive, I think, is the adjective that we're looking for.
It wasn't even the best move Lewis did.
Wow. Okay, so let's get to
yes.
Yeah. So, okay,
you know the one.
All right, so let's get on to between George and Lewis still. Overtake 2 ish. Okay, so Lewis starts to gap him. Clearly the quicker of the Mercedes drivers, but then makes a mistake, runs off, and then we get to the old spoon incident. Baxter, I'll come to you first, bro, because this is where it gets techie. Yeah. How did you react to it in the first instance?
Yeah, I thought it was clumsy. I mean, I was getting flashbacks to Brazil 21 at that point. You know, there's firm defense and then there's forcing another driver off the track, which is something we've been talking about quite a lot this season. As I said, I was surprised that Lewis didn't get some kind of reprimand or penalty for it. You know, we know that he's been penalised at more than usual this season for incidents. In a way, I almost see it as karma rebalancing itself for the absolute nonsense that was the Spa penalty when he had that coming together with Checo. And I am pleased that the stewards took a different view to it than I did, because I think obviously it would have ruined Lewis's race. And as I said before, we want to see hard racing. I mean, I know people say, well, you would say Verstappen should get a penalty for Brazil. I mean, yes, and I thought Lewis would have got a penalty here. So that's just how it is on that particular day.
I don't disagree with you, Baxty, and according to Appendix L, Chapter 4, Article 2, per the Sporting Code, the International Sporting Code of Conduct, no less, he should have got a penalty because it states very clearly that you need to keep four wheels on track at all times unless there are mitigating circumstances. So as a Lewis Hamilton fan, I've got to call FIA on their consistent inconsistency. At this stage, chaps, I feel like I need to get like a little whistle that just I can press it every time and it just says consistently inconsistent. So much or so often am I using that term. I'd agree with you there, Baxty. Shez, talk to me, brother. Are we in agreement on the characterisation of Lewis Hamilton's defence into spoon on Jordan?
Yeah, that was a little clumsy, wasn't it? But
I don't think clumsy's the word. Clumsy was Checo on K-Magay, which I'm sure we will get to. I think it was overly aggressive from Lewis.
Yeah, so the way I saw that in real time was like, it looked like Lewis had outbraked himself. Like he was trying to get into spoon much later than George, and he did by going off the track. And again, if you remember back to 2021, we spent an entire week asking the FIA or F1 to put up the onboard of Max.
Oh my gosh!
Which eventually we got. And it'd be. I think this will be another one. Will be interesting to see exactly what Lewis was doing in the car. But ultimately, does that really matter? No. Was he off the track in part of his defence? Yes. Did he also? Did that also mean that George had to go off track to avoid a collision? Yes. And ultimately, what that means is that whatever overtaking maneuver was done or was attempted was not going to be done in a safe manner, and that goes against the regulation. So yeah, there probably should have been a penalty there, but you could argue that there are other instances later in the race, like Charles Leclerc's move on Russell later on in the race, completed with all four wheels off the track. Checo's move, Hamilton's move on Perez, as you said in Singapore last week.
Consistently inconsistent are the F1 stewards. This is how
I do want to call one thing out. I've seen a lot of, we're all Lewis Hamilton fans here. Everyone knows this, and what I would say is, there are people saying, "Oh, we're really pleased that Lewis, he showed George the way, put him in his place," and then in the same breath, we'll say, "Yeah, but Verstappen should have had a penalty in Brazil." It's like, no, they both should have had a penalty. Let's be frank here; both should have had a penalty for those incidents. So yeah, I just wanted to get that one out there because it's like, well, you can't have it both ways just because it's your favourite driver.
But then, Baxley, we've got an argument as to whom is more consistently inconsistent, the F1 community or the FIA and the race director. I don't know, bruv. It's a close run thing. Go on, then we fast forward and then we get to the meat in this Mercedes sandwich, because with 16 laps remaining, Carlos Sainz is approaching Lewis Hamilton, who is on what's turned out in retrospect to be ostensibly the quicker strategy, who in turn is approaching his teammate, George Russell. You are Toto Wolff, Shez. At that point, in real time, what's the call and when do you make it, if indeed there is a call to make?
I would have been screaming at the screen to have Lewis through immediately. But I would have basically said, you know that this guy's tires are 10 laps younger than George is, and you know that there's a shark in the guise of a prancing horse behind you, and there's a Charles Leclerc that's potentially available to be overtaken. Give your guy the best shot. This isn't. And before anyone says, "Oh, but what about Singapore?" and they should have let Lewis through there. Completely different circumstances there. In that situation, you had two drivers on the same tire, at exactly the same age, gunning for the same position. This is not the same. And in this situation, if I was Toto, and I'm sure it was, because from what I understand, Toto did make this call in the end, because there was dithering on the pit wall. I would have been just George, move out of the way
straight away.
This is not your race.
So go on then, Shez. The counter argument clearly in my mind is George is the future, right? Do you want to? You just don't, especially not because of, especially after Singapore and what happened to him crashing on the final lap. What you don't want to do is you don't want to clip this dude's wings and stamp all over his confidence. You don't need to do that any further, Ray, by instituting the team order yet again with only a couple of laps left, surely, Shez, if I'm to play devil's advocate.
Yes, I love how you're playing devil's advocate here, Cameron. It's very devilish, because that's not the argument, right? You're not clipping somebody's wings. Russell was on a strategy that was a gamble, and that's not his fault. You know, he was on a strategy that didn't quite work out. That's not a.
Well, it is his fault, Shez, because he flip-flopping massively.
But
that was his call.
Yeah,
Mercedes
sure,
didn't want him on
but
that.
it's not a play on his. It's not us making aspersions about his ability. We're not saying you're not fast enough. You're not. Your racecraft isn't good enough. That's not what we're saying. All we're saying is at this moment in time, this is the situation.
Yeah,
and we're in a fight in the constructors' championship for second in the on the table. For me, that was a no-brainer. Just get him out of the way.
Very, very techie. Chime in on this quickly, Baxty, before I go off.
Yeah, as I said at the start, I don't blame George for wanting to try and better his position. I actually thought he played the team game, by saying, "Look, I'll support Lewis," but it's a difficult decision to make, and I think ultimately it wasn't the right idea. Like, I can see why George did it. I don't blame him for doing it. I don't subscribe to this whole George isn't a team player, because he was playing the team game in that situation. But I think Mercedes made the right call. Get George out the way, let Lewis at least try go after Leclerc. Which actually, interestingly, they actually told Lewis to give George DRS, which he did, but George's tyres were so screwed and his traction out the final corner was terrible that Sainz got past him anyway.
So now, they knew like 10 laps before.
The argument would be, well, then why didn't they just why did they tell Lewis to give the DRS? Lewis was never going to catch Charles Leclerc because his rear tyres were buggered. Like, he was having real problems with the rears. He was never going to get close enough to Charles to threaten his race. So I could understand why Mercedes then said, okay, give him DRS, which I know Lewis wasn't happy about, but he did it because, team game, everything else. But yeah, George's tyres were so gone, it was pointless. And then, Lewis definitely had the pace to hold off Sainz, but he was never going to get after Leclerc. He was too far up the road, and with rear tyres that were causing him issue, never going to happen.
You know what, chaps? It all felt a bit, especially absolutely with the benefit of hindsight, and everybody's a genius with the benefit of hindsight, of course. But looking back on it, and I've rewatched it a couple of times, it all looks a bit hodgepodge, exactly what Shez said as his opening stanza. As soon as you see Carlos Sainz charging, it needs to be quick, right? You can't afford to. If you are going to do that, and I'm assuming that Lewis is happy to not chase down Charles and do the sacrificial lamb thing again and do what Carlos did to Lando so successfully in Singapore. If you are going to do that, then there is a time and a place for that. Don't wait. And here's the problem, Baxty, and this is why what George did yesterday is much to the ire of Lewis Hamilton fans all over the world. If you're playing the team game, there and you have a 200 level IQ racing mind, which I think George Russell does, I think we can all agree that, then you jump out the way straight away. What George was trying to do is maximize his own outcome, and only then when he's realized that he doesn't have the speed nor the tires, then he reverts back to this, why don't we do what Lando and Carlos did, and then we can do the switcheroo on the final lap. It's almost like it's a team ethos of convenience. Exactly what I said on the Baxty B Twitter space at Baxty B for all of the sick Twitter spaces in the F1 community. Exactly what I said yesterday, Baxty. It feels like George, and even for me, I like George Russell, and he's an F1 driver, and how can you not be a tad selfish as an F1 driver? It's almost like a contradiction in terms. The problem being, though, that it feels, at least from the outside, and none of us know 100% right, none of us are on the pit wall to say this categorically, but it looks from the outside like George is willing to play the team game, not exclusively but most frequently when it suits him. And that's an issue. The phrase that I used yesterday, and I'll trot it out again. What George feels like he's doing is what the banks did in 2008. They were happy to privatise their gains, the profits, and socialise their losses. And that, again, is almost as consistently inconsistent as the FIA and the F1 community now, Shez.
But Cameron, yesterday was for me, that was a self-fulfilling prophecy. If George had jumped out the way immediately, then Lewis would have he would have driven off into the distance, and perhaps would have had a chance against Charles Leclerc. I do agree with Baxty. I think that actually overtaking him was probably a bit of a long shot, but George held him up to the point where the only option was we're going to have to let him through, but I'll do it on the last lap, and he has to give me DRS. It's like that was it was a sum game, wasn't it? It was the only. It was a zero-sum game. It was the only thing that they could do at that point because George had put him in that position in the first place by holding him up. That's what I didn't like about that.
It's techie, Shez. As you outline it even more, it just makes me not. I like George, but I don't like that behaviour. It's convenient. And it's almost like, I suppose what makes it worse, again, if I put my Lewis Hamilton fan cap on, Lewis last week in Singapore was in the faster car, right? And didn't really, there's none of this, he's got to let me, he gave him a cheeky hurry up subliminally, well, George needs to get a wriggle on. But there was none of this from Lewis, let's reverse there was nothing explicit from Lewis. I think Lewis has been very patient and submissive a little bit in this relationship. So now fast forward 1 week later to bloody Suzuka, and it's like, well, I would expect a little bit more reverence from George, a little bit, not diplomacy, but I don't want to. It upsets me a tad when he's so bullish over the red, like when he's doing the conductor thing, right? I'm just like, bloody Nora, George, really? So much? Baxty, talk to me, brother. Am I barking at the wrong tree here?
Yeah, I think I don't mind. I mean, look, I think the team could have been firmer with George. They were trying to say to him, look, this is an instruction, and they shouldn't have let him negotiate. It should be, you are inverting the cars, do it. You will do it. Rather than him going like, we could do this and blah, blah, blah. And as I said, the one line I was really pissed off with him about was he owes me one. No, he doesn't owe you anything. He forced you off the track. That's just racing. If you're trying to get favours from your teammate because he owes you one, then you're not in the right sport, fella. That's not how this sport works.
And who is he? Baxter? I don't know. There are okay, so it's the heat of the moment. I can't be too harsh on him. People say
Mm.
things, and he said as much as he was pitch perfect in the scrum afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Borderline apologetic, and I don't hate that. That's the George Russell that millions around the world know and love. But the chap in the car, I just like say Lewis. Why are you saying he for? But again, he's heat of the moment. Shez, talk to me, bruv, because I'm I don't know. I don't want to be too harsh on George, but from what I saw, I didn't like what I saw from him at
Yeah,
Suzuka. I'll be honest with you, bruv.
yeah, I feel the same way, Cameron. Like, I don't need reverence. I don't need him to like bow down. That's not what it's about, right? But there has to be some common sense in there as well. Like, you have to look at the situation that's around you. Like you said, he's a driver that we consider to have a racing brain. But like, clearly you could tell that the guy that your teammate coming up behind you was much quicker than you were, and it was because of the strategy that you yourself had put forward. Okay, that didn't work. Sometimes that happens, but don't then be petty about it and you know, hold him up or try and come up with a way that still benefits you. You know, some you win, some you lose. That's just how this goes, isn't it?
Yeah, he was trying to negotiate with no chips. He didn't have a point from which to negotiate. I was like, George,
But that negotiation, like Baxty said, delayed things to the point that it actually made the result worse.
Yeah. Techie. Go on then, Baxi. Let me ask you this final question on this. And again, I still don't know the answer, even though I've watched it a gazillion times.
Mm.
If Lewis plays ball and says, "All right, then, George, I'm gonna do you this another favour here and play rear gunner," do you think they can get to the line? George, Lewis, Carlos Sainz in that order?
Well, I mean, the position would have switched because George said he would give the position on the last lap, which again would never have happened. I personally think Lewis's tyres would have been cooked from the dirty air, and Carlos would have taken them both. Personally, I think at which point George then is in for an even deeper world of crap from Lewis Hamilton fans at that point. But yeah, I think look, it goes to show that Mercedes need to sort out their deliberation. They need to be firmer in their decisions, because if Toto Wolff from his hospital bed is having to make a call post knee surgery and go, for God's sake, guys, sort it out, that doesn't speak well, and that worries me about Mercedes going forward if they do end up in a championship fight within the next 2 seasons, because you've got to have, it's not just all on Toto. You've got to have that clarity of thought. James Vowles was brilliant at this, and it's kind of like we are now beginning to see the impact of his departure.
Oh my gosh, chaps, it's techie that. It's techie. I'm a bit fearful. Again, friend of the channel, Mr. Peter Windsor, has been talking about this for what seems like 2 years now, saying it was inevitability that because George is such a killer, that these two were going to clash at some stage, particularly if they have a car capable of winning the championship. So it feels like this is a foreshadowing, chaps, especially if they develop the car. Shez, talk to me.
It's just this is a weird way for this kind of antagonism to come about. It's not like George is quick, right? And he's and especially since the break, he's been amazing over a single lap. But it's not like it's not like the pace of him has blown Lewis away or anything like that. It seems to be that he's kind of realized. Okay, there's a couple of things, right? And sorry to go off on a tangent, but I think the expectation was that Lewis would have won the title in 2021 and then backed off his commitment a little bit. So he's not then he'd be happy to sort of support George in his aspirations to win titles with Mercedes, even if that wasn't immediately obvious on the surface, and that hasn't really happened. And George is realizing that Lewis on top form is not somebody that you can just get the best of, even if you're unbelievably quick over a lap. And it's meant that the way that he's trying to get his nose ahead is by other means.
But Shez, that bit I don't hate. I don't hate that bit at all. Like I think what I'm more concerned with is the hows than as versus the what's right. He's an F1 driver, of course he's going to do a bit of skullduggery. In fact, I'd flip reverse that, Shez, and say I dislike it when drivers aren't doing that, when they're almost too passive, right, and not looking to get an advantage over their teammate or anybody else on the grid. I disagree just a tad, ever so slightly, with George's howls on the weekend.
So that's it. So I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that in and of itself. It's the way that it's done. It just seems clumsy. Like it's done right at the last minute. Like that's when he's asking for stuff to happen.
But
when it's on track, rather than earlier on in the weekend, earlier on in the week,
but they're
changing the car towards what he wants and doing those kind of things. It's a last minute. I want favors on the track. That I feel is clumsy and not the way to get yourself ahead in a team necessarily.
But go on then, Baxty. Therein lies, surely that's where a team of the competence, in inverted commas, of Mercedes and the heritage and 8 constructors' trophies on the wall, that's surely where the competence of Mercedes must kick in. And instead of messaging Lewis, Bono does, and say, mind how you go, chaps, just make sure you leave space. Surely the message should be, at that stage, George is going to dip out the way very, very quickly. His engineer has had a chat with him. You've got nothing to worry about, lads. Sure, I'm taking some of the blame off of George Russell's shoulders and putting it.
Yeah, no. This isn't entirely a George situation. Yeah, absolutely. Mercedes needed to be firmer with their call. We all love Mercedes because they let their drivers race, but sometimes you have to think about the bigger picture here. We know how ruthless Mercedes can be. We saw it in Russia 2018 when they didn't need to do it, but they still inverted Bottas and Hamilton because they wanted to boost Lewis's position against Vettel, even though the championship was pretty much all but done by that point. So they just need to be firmer in their decisions, and as I said, the fact that Toto had to do it and he wasn't even there just goes to show that they were dilly-dallying around. They had 3 separate team principals this weekend. They had D'Ambrosio, they had Shove, and Bradley Lord. And I think one of them just needed to be firmer. I mean, you'd think D'Ambrosio, being an ex-racing driver, would understand it and be like, no, clear out the way. But yeah, Cameron, you said at the start, should they, George is the future, should they be clipping his wings? He's the future, but he's also the right now. And, sometimes you've just got to take your licks. We saw a team be ruthless at the end of the race further back with Alpine. Say, sorry, Gasly, give the position back. Gasly was raging about it. But that's motor racing. You've got the team need to be firm.
Oh, Baxty, it's very techie. I do feel like, finally on this, Shez, I do feel like the team, to a lesser or greater extent, there is something with George Russell where, I'm not debating their intention or the rationale behind this, but I do feel to an extent, especially when it comes to the interaction on track between George and Lewis, I feel like it's almost like they're treading on eggshells a little bit, right? They're dancing around the topic, not saying the imperatives, the instructions, no pun intended, that need to be said. Am I right or wrong there, Shez?
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. Like there is a little bit of, oh, am I allowed to do this? Yeah, I think I am. But my point about this was just that, if George does want to get his nose ahead, it's not in situations like this on track where he needs to be making the difference. It's back at the factory, pushing the development in the direction that he wants it, doing the time in the sim, but maybe he is, I don't know. But it's difficult to do that in the team that Lewis has been ensconced in for so long. I get that, but I don't think that that doing your negotiating on track necessarily endears you to the team. And I'm sure in the debrief they would have been saying to him that wasn't the way that we should have played that race.
Oh, Shez, good luck, Mercedes, for next year, if indeed you do find yourself developing a decent set of wheels that can challenge an RB19 that's one of the most dominant. Second agenda topic of the day, chaps. Talk to me about this Red Bull stuff. Are we clear on Red Bull at Singapore? Was the cause of all their ills undisputably now set up? Nothing to do with TD018, Baxty.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think most of us realised that it probably was the case, but we wanted to see where we were with Suzuka, and yeah, it was obvious from free practice one that Red Bull were going to dominate. They won the Constructors' Championship this weekend, so congratulations to them. It's the season they've had is an all-timer. I mean, we're talking McLaren 88 here. They fully deserve it. They've been the best team all year, not just with the car. Max has been on a level above everybody else. And you've had the team working operationally, pit stops, strategy, and mechanically as well. Everything they put in the car works. They've just crushed the year, and they're going to be very hard to stop in the next couple of years as well, even if there is challenge.
It's techie, Baxty, very bloody techie. Shez, where's their soft underbelly? If indeed they have won this Red Bull team, are we being serious when we say there are absolutely zero weaknesses across the board? Where are they get-atable?
I think their issue was, maybe we could make every track Singapore. Maybe that's the answer to this. But it is a car where the individual components of it are so well integrated that you can't take one thing out and then go, that's it, that's the silver bullet. And we've said this all season, and it sort of shows in the fact that the other teams that are vying for that position, they all have their own individual strengths, but none of them are able to create a car as at one that has all of the ingredients that the Red Bull has. Sorry, I'm a bit of a sore throat. So
don't hate it, mate. Get well soon, Shez. You've got lots of travelling to do, mate. I don't like coughing and spluttering on the plane. I feel like that's not a. You should be ineligible to travel in this era, in this post-COVID era. I jest. So go on then, chaps. I will play this back to you. I think there's one in and amongst the genius, Adrian Huey's genius, of course, Max Verstappen's unparalleled driving capability currently. I think there is one weakness at that Red Bull team, and he has a name. That name is Sergio Checo Perez. What is this dude playing at, chaps? I don't even know if I've seen a clumsier manoeuvre than the one that he tried to put up the inside of Kevin Magnussen. Like, what is going on with this chap, Shez? I just don't even. I love causality, but I don't understand what in Checo Perez's life could have caused him to all of a sudden be so bad. Because missing out on a couple Q2s and Q3s is one thing, but this was amateur hour, no?
Yeah, I think that move on K-Mag, he's practicing something, isn't he? Because didn't he do the same thing to Albon at Singapore? It's exactly the same move.
Mate.
And Sonoda.
Mate.
The Sonoda one was a little bit
similar though.
50-50, right? But that Albon move and that K-Mag move, maybe he's trying to practice something. Maybe we're going to see the fruition of it in a couple of races. But right now, it seems to be anything he tries, he's hitting someone or something. That car is clearly not suited to his driving style. It just does not flatter the way that he goes about his racing. And you know that there must be a pressure on him. I think I read or I watched a video from Driver 61 this week where it was just put in very stark terms that Max's average qualifying position is something like 3.2, which seems outrageously
Not
low
good
to me.
enough.
But Checo's is ninth in a car that
It's
has
not.
won
It's not good
every race
enough, Rev.
bar one this season.
He's
So,
mess-
but that must be playing on him as well. It must be.
he's messing about, Shez. But I think you do him. I
You think I've
think
been
you.
too generous?
Yeah, you are, bruv. You are, and shout out to Callum and Scott, by the way, if they're watching. Legendary market leading channeling driver 61. I think you're being too generous, though, Shez, because I don't think you can blame not those moves, not the one on
No,
Alba,
no,
not the one on K-Mug. You can't blame that on an incompatibility between his driving style and the handling characteristics of the car. That's just not what he's doing there. Is just not. He's not chewing his food before he swallows. Right. That's just basics.
yeah.
Like they teach kids that in like long before like I don't know open wheel category. Like this is like 10, 11 year old stuff. I know this. Like chill out, mate. Like I don't know. Chew your food before you swallow it, right, Baxty?
Yeah, it just smacked of desperation. It's like
Yeah, that's it.
I'm in the quickest car. I'm in one of the most dominant cars ever created. You know, I got squeezed at turn one. Wasn't really his fault what happened to him on turn one. Other than not qualifying further up the grid, which was his fault. But you know, the incident itself was not his fault. Um, he's just found out he's going to take a penalty for something that was probably beyond his control as well. You know, you got to come in and pit for a new front wing, and all of a sudden you're overtaking people, and it's just like okay, fine. But the move he pulled on Magnussen was one of the worst I've ever seen. Well, I was
So
watching.
bad.
Credit to the F1 World Feed; they had the perfect camera angle on at that moment, and you just saw him go up the inside, and you thought this is going to end in tears.
How
Like,
do you not know? How did you not see this?
yeah.
Like how it's so obvious. Ah,
Here's the thing: Max, has, on a couple of occasions this year, has had to make charges through the field. The one we all talk about is Miami. Max would not have made that move. We know Max is aggressive, but he picks his moment to be aggressive. He would not have gone for K Mag at that point if roles were reversed. He would have waited and taken him at the right time. You know, we all talk about how good this Red Bull is with its DRS. Why why do you have to be impatient, Checo? Just because you got a 5 second penalty and you're trying to maximize your position, it was an absolute disaster of a drive. You know, let alone he retired from the race twice.
he's not chewing his food properly, is he, Baxty? That's what he's just not too over eager. He's yeah, no, I didn't rate that at all from him. I think those moves that he's doing. I know that his contract is ironclad, but can you imagine Helmut and Kristen in the debrief looking at each other like, I know he brings in a lot of money, Mexican sponsorship and all that, but
This is why I think Daniel Ricciardo's got the AlphaTauri drive for next year and not Liam Lawson, because
Yeah.
I think they are very clear that they want to bring him back in for 25. And if he doesn't deliver, they'll bring in Lawson, which I think would be a mistake because he needs time to get used to it full time. But yeah, I think Checo by 24 is gone. He is gone. And you know, we'll just have to see.
and that should shares light a fire up the asses of Mercedes, right? Because again, if we're talking soft underbellies, and if Red Bull are get atable, it will be by a team who have two number one drivers, right? So that you can leverage the pincer move, the strategy, the undercut, that type of thing. And so if they're going to get at them, surely they need to do it next year before they replace Checo Perez with a serious driver.
Good.
I was going to say Red Bull did that brilliantly in 21.
Yeah, they didn't seem to need but it looked like this season Max didn't need a number two anyway. He pretty much won the constructors on his own, and he's gonna win the title next race up with 6 races to spare. It's just, I mean, this is
in a sprint race.
Bonkers.
I mean, it's
absolute
just
chaos.
nuts, isn't it?
Absolute chaos, that level of dominance. And I suppose at this point it might be it feels very apropos to give a shout out to Max Verstappen because he's dominating. People say he's a rocket ship, and I don't doubt that for a second. But when you see the variant, the best way of fair testing this is, of course, to look at the performance of the teammate, right? And the extent to which Max Verstappen and the frequency with which Max Verstappen is gapping, he's almost in a different world to Checo Perez each and every single time. I mean, it's tight for seconds still, right? The gap
Lewis is catching. Yeah.
The gap between Lewis and Checo isn't that much, and yet and still Red Bull are able to wrap up the constructors.
Yeah.
Like so early in the season, testament to Max Verstappen's dominance, man. He's been ridiculous. Rocket ship or no rocket ship, chaps. Let's talk very quickly about McLaren. Because me and you, Shez, have been talking about this offline, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
Oscar Piastri, where you mentioned, shout out to the lad from Oz. He had a decent race, didn't he, Shez?
Yeah, it was good.
Did you think he was gonna beat Lando?
Oh, look. Yes, yeah. I had a hope. I had a hope and a feeling that I thought it might happen. And that was kind of given credence by the fact that, you know, over Friday and Saturday, actually he started off like nowhere and then gradually built himself up to the point that he was 300ths ahead in qualifying at Suzuka, first time up as a rookie. I mean, that's crazy. That's something, isn't it? Yeah. Right? Like, you can't scoff at that. And where he showed his, and I'm going to say it's inexperience, not ability. It was a lack of experience. Is in knowing what the limit of the tires was and what performance he could reliably take out of them at what point in a stint, which, you know, is a long way of saying he couldn't manage his tires as well as Lando could. But that is an experience thing. This is not something that characterizes rookies. It's something that characterizes drivers that have been doing this for a little bit of time, which is what Lando is. And that's not taking anything away from Lando because his drive was superlative, you know, to manage his tires and manage his race and put himself in a position where it was a no-brainer that Oscar Piastri needed to be moved out of the way for him. You know, that was brilliant. But I think, as I said to you before, I think Oscar's every single race is showing his potential, and he is showing that he does learn. And just to finish that, there was a fun little thing in the races post race podcast about this, that even the team, even McLaren was saying that, obviously he didn't nail it by the end, but in the final stint he was starting to do the things that he needed to have done in the first couple of stints to manage his tires and get to the end of the race, which is why he finished as close to Lando, or, you know, as comfortably in third as he did.
Shez, you know what? After so long, I'm glad that you're finally putting some respect on Lando Norris's name. I think that dude is very, very good. You know, like something about that chap, and I've followed him for a while now and seen him in car. I think Lando Norris is underrated yet and still. Like, genuinely, I think outside of Lewis Hamilton, if anyone, mate, do I put Charles in this? No, you know, I'll say it like this, Baxty. Right or wrong, call me out. Outside of Lewis Hamilton, I think Lando Norris is probably the only dude that has fire for Max Verstappen over the course of a 24 race season. Right or wrong?
I would chuck George Russell in there as well. Based purely on that Baku stuff, George will not back out of it. Even if he and Max take each other out at every single race and cost each other both the title, he will not be afraid to go toe to toe with Max. I have no doubt about that.
Shez, talk to me, bruv. This is gonna get techie.
Wait, about which one? Charles, Lando, or
right,
George?
of the next ones, of the next the crop that are up and coming.
Yeah,
is Lando that guy to challenge?
Look,
take the challenge to Max Verstappen.
My problem with Lando, right, is it's actually not even just him. It's the fact that Red Bull so openly want to court him as a teammate to Max Verstappen, and the fact that Max himself is kind of, yeah, I'd be happy to have Lando in the car next to me. In fact, I'll be really happy to have Lando in the car next to me. What does that tell you about how Max rates him and his ability to take the fight to him?
I don't think you can read too much into that, Shez.
I think racing drivers, as going back as far as Fangio, don't want to have a guy in the other car that they think has a realistic chance of beating them.
Well, Alan and Senna
Didn't know. He didn't know what he was.
Wow.
He was
Max. You might want to forgive Max because
Max
he knows
has seen
not what
enough
he
of
does
Lando,
either.
though. Max has seen enough of Lando to know that's.
I think he might be surprised. I'm dying. If I could pay some money now and guarantee that Lando would be in that Red Bull seat at some point within the next couple of years, mate,
I think it'd be
plump up the cash.
tighter. I think it'd be tighter. Yeah, I mean, Lando being in that seat, I don't think is out of the question. Whether he beats Max Verstappen, I think, is another question.
It's a huge.
Is he going to be closer than Checo? Yes. Do I think he's going to? Do I think he's going to beat Max Verstappen over the course of the season? I don't. Hand on heart, I don't think so.
It's a huge challenge, Shez. But what I'm saying is that I think of that up and coming crop, the next gen, I think he might be most likely. And even this, check this out, Shez. I think if you're gonna try and beat Lando in equal machinery, you kind of want to do it now. In 2 years' time, when he's got 2 years more experience underneath his belt, and now he's racing a decent dude in the same car, Oscar Piastri. Listen to me. I think
Cameron,
he's going to be a dangerous man.
Cameron, I see that completely the opposite. I think that if you give it a couple more seasons and Piastri keeps going along the trajectory that he's on at the moment, I think Lando isn't going to look quite as good as he does right now. Which is why, for me, and this is me being as consistent as I can. I think the next cab off the rank is Charles Leclerc. I have done for ages.
Charles is fat. I think you're in love with Charles Leclerc's Gilles Villeneuve pace, and conveniently have this cognitive dissonance where all of his mistakes and his errors fade to black when you're assessing him. Shez, Baxty, talk to me about McLaren very quickly. McLaren, we've got to put some respect on McLaren's name, right? Because they've come. I destroyed them on the couple of last lap appearances. I said that they've had no chance of going anywhere. So, what do I know? Don't listen to Cameron F1's predictions. Baxty, how have McLaren come so far so quickly in with an engine that is Mercedes and a gearbox and a rear suspension that is all Mercedes manufactured? How have they done this, Baxty?
Yeah, I mean, I think the success of McLaren shows that the. Oh, sorry. Seems to call what Shez has got. Sorry.
This is, oh my God, podcast magic.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think Mercedes' problems aren't limited. The engine isn't a problem. Clearly, the suspension itself isn't a problem. They've got other chassis problems with the rear at Mercedes. McLaren said at the start of the season, we have changed our concept. We haven't quite got it right yet, but we're going to spend the time learning, bringing upgrades to the car to make it quicker. And I think, unlike Aston Martin, who did their usual tracing paper trick, McLaren have taken the time to understand their concept better than Aston Martin did. And that is why they're now reaping the benefits of it. So much so that I think if there is a team best placed to challenge Red Bull next year, it's not Mercedes, it's McLaren.
Wow.
On that bombshell.
Yeah, on that bombshell. Oh my gosh. You know what though, backstage, you say the words, I recoil. But when you check the evidence and the stats and their line of travel, you can't argue with that. Well, I did
a tweet actually praising Andrea Stella. What a job he's done. Zach Brown is front and center, and you don't see a lot of Andrea Stella, but he's gone into that team, picked them up, because losing Andreas Seidel was massive for McLaren. He was such an influential figure within that team. And he got them on the right direction, but Andrea Stella has taken that baton and he has run with it. Never been a team prince before. He's not really kind of been groomed for that position. He's had to step in last minute. and the work that he and his technical team are doing, and they've got Rob Marshall from Red Bull coming next year as well. I think McLaren ahead. Once they get that new wind tunnel up and running, they're going to be very dangerous for a long time, and I'm all here for it. All Lewis Hamilton fans are lapsed McLaren fans. Let's be frank.
Oh my gosh, Shez, talk to me. This is
Yeah, I mean, I was literally gonna say the same thing, that I think that the two words that characterize this resurgence are Andrea and Stella, because he's a, he's not a lifelong McLaren guy, but he's been there since 2015 when Fernando turned up, and he's steadily risen up the ranks. Quiet guy, doesn't really like doing media appearances, but now that he's there, he's brilliant. And he's brought in this restructure. I have to say, I was fairly critical of the James Key regime, the technical regime that was under him. And I thought it needed a restructure. That's exactly what Andrea has done. And even without having the wind tunnel, they've that infrastructure, and you know how much I love infrastructure. That's what's starting to pay dividends now, and it can only get better. The only sort of fly in the ointment is what you've just said, that as good as the Mercedes powertrain is and the gearbox is, it's not the same as having your own bespoke power unit and all the rest of it, which is why Aston have sort of invested so heavily in making sure that they get Honda power units for 26. And I think, as good as McLaren have been in the last season and how good they may be next season, if they really, really want to reach the upper echelons, it's going to be with bespoke power units.
Absolutely, Shez. Nailed it, bruv. So then quickly, as we round third base, sirs, I want to pitch two questions at you. In fact, two points. First one is a question. Techie. I saw somebody say this. I was like, this is a genius question. The Red Bull win 8 World Constructors Championships before Mercedes win their 9th. Yeah, Techie. Go on then, Baxty, since you've made the face, I'll come to you first.
On current trajectory, yes.
Oh, Shez, to that you say what, sir?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's gonna be yes. And we're in what, 2023, 24, 25, possibly 26 as well. That's gonna be that's 9, isn't it?
It's hard to say no. It's hard to say no. I'd agree with both of you. And then secondly, and penultimately, as far as today's agenda items, can we talk about this qualifying lap from Max Verstappen? I know it feels like it was 200 years removed now, even though it was only Saturday. Baxty, what did you think about the lap? Is it as god tier as Karun Chanduk tried to make out, or just a very decent lap from a very good driver in a very fast car?
You've been reading my Twitter page, haven't you? Look, this was one of Max's best ever laps. It was unbelievable. The 1:29.0 he did at the start of Q3 was a very, very good lap, better than anybody else. But you could make the knock of, well, he's in the fastest car. That lap, the 1:28.8, that was where he made the difference. And he perfectly positioned the car. He knew exactly where he needed to be with his apexes. It was flawless driving. Flawless. Where I disagree with Karun Chanduk is that he compared it to Lewis Hamilton Singapore 2018 and Senna 88. And I've had a couple of days to think about this as well. I don't put that in that category simply because of the context surrounding all three performances. So obviously Lewis, yes, he was in a very fast Mercedes, but that weekend they were struggling. He was only in the third fastest car, then does that lap. Senna 88, he's up against Prost. Need I say anymore? And he destroys Prost by 1 second. Not a Checo Perez equivalent driver from the era. He's destroying Prost. Like, come on. Max had no competition. Nobody was close to him. If he'd done that 1:28.8 with, say, Lewis or Charles within a tenth of him or a tenth or two within him, you know what? Yeah, you put it in that company, but he was only against himself. And basically the gentle encouragement of GP, shall we say, going, bet you can't get the 1:28, mate. Bet you can't get it. Bet you can't get it. And then he did. And I don't mean that to take away from the skill and the quality of the driving in the lap. I just think, yeah, by my logic, the Monaco lap was better.
Shez, talk to me.
I've got to do a soft disagree on that one. My reasoning being that first of all, I take your point about Monaco, but the S's, which is where he was making up most of his time, has got to be the most technically challenging bit of tarmac to take in a Formula One car. And if you watched him either on board via the T-bar or even better via the helmet cam, man, it was just inch perfect every time. You could see his eyes looking at exactly where the front end of the car needed to go, and the car did exactly that every single time. It was unreal. And he started the whole weekend off with a lap that was a second and a half quicker than the rest of the field. And just to put that stakes comment into context, yes, I take your point. It doesn't have the mysticism of the 88 lap, which I think has become much more famous because of what Senna said about it, the tunnel and I was getting faster and faster and I scared myself I was going so quickly. Or the Singapore lap where the Mercs were on the back foot that weekend and Lewis pulled out a lap at the last minute that even he couldn't beat the next time round. Um, the stakes here was Max was angry. Max was really angry this weekend about all of the chat about technical directives and you guys are only ahead because you've been bending the rules, if not the wings, for the past season. So he came here with a point to prove, and he did that emphatically with a lap that was just out of this world. And he put that to bed with a fun little comment at the end in the post quali debrief where he said that everyone that's been talking about the technical directive can go suck eggs. But he did what he came to do.
Correction, Shez, go and suck an egg. He's a joker, isn't he? Go on, Baxty.
I read something today. It was a quote from Horner that said that they were playing. They'd met up between the two races, and Max said, "I want to win this weekend, and I want to win the race by 20 seconds." And he was within 0.6 of doing that.
He was a blue flag away from doing it, mate.
Yeah.
This is bonkers now.
He literally
chaps.
predicted he would win by that much.
No, I'm not having it. This is crazy now, chaps. Surely, I don't even understand how he can do that. That level of dominance where he can like pick his shot, like call his shot. Like what are we doing anymore? These lot need to. I don't know. I think it's almost shameful for the likes of Mercedes and Ferrari that they're getting beat every single week this badly, right? They need to be not embarrassed, but have a little bit of shame and dignity and pull their a little bit, right? It's crazy. I would just say about that lap again. Sector 1, I don't even know about Sector 2 and Sector 3, clearly very, very good sectors. But Sector 1 in particular, as I'm looking at that, I'm trying to pick holes and understand where there's more time there that he hasn't accessed. And I was just like, this is like something different that I'm looking at here. Not dissimilar to Monaco Sector 3 and Jeddah Sector 1, Sector 2. It almost looks like a simulation run, right? The optimum way to take 1A and 1B as Peter Windsor calls it. I'm just looking at it. I don't see how he can improve, which makes me know that this dude is operating on a very high level, chaps. I don't know. Shy of Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton, I don't know who's going to beat that geezer. I'll be honest. Go on then, lads, as we round third base, let's do some FIA slander. It wouldn't be the shakedown without some customary FIA slander. Checo Perez pits and they tell him to retire the car. And then Red Bull's Jonathan Wheatley has a chat with the stewards and says, listen, are we gonna get this penalty next race? They say yes, apparently, and they say, listen, if we bring him back out, unretire the car, can you absorb the penalty in this race? They apparently say, yeah, cool. So they unretire the car, Checo Perez goes out, and then all of a sudden after the race we understand that the stewards have rescinded everything that came out of this chat, and Checo Perez is going to get a penalty for next race. Baxty, talk to me. Is that how you understand it, Baxty? You make a face. Maybe I'll get it wrong.
I haven't heard that. I've heard different things. I mean, I don't think the FIA are being particularly clear on this because I don't think they know what to do. I think once again, Red Bull have caught them on the hop with something and they need to think about it. I think that I was very uncomfortable with the whole situation. I thought once a driver has retired from a race, that's it. You can't just then go back out 26 laps later because you want to avoid a penalty. Clearly, Red Bull, they're under. I mean, we're talking about the dominance of Red Bull. No other team would have had that level of knowledge to be able to pull that out. And again, it's what makes them so hard to beat. But as far as I'm concerned, if you have finished a race, your driver has got out of the cockpit. That's it. You should not, that car is done. It should not be allowed to go back out onto the racetrack. Even if you do it like Red Bull did, you join very safely and everything else. No, that just because it creates blue flags, and you don't. Other drivers will be like, well, hang on, where did he come from? I mean, Lando Norris lost 4 seconds under a VSC because of Perez as well. The FIA need to close that up because other teams, it sets a very dangerous precedent as well. Could you imagine if that was Max in a title fight and post Monza, for example, and say Red Bull have got the car back in the garage, and then they go, well, Max is going to get a 3-place grid drop, and then they go, oh well, no, we're going to send him back out. We can fix the car in quick time. We can get him out during the race, and no, that's not how. No. The FIA need to go. Once a car is retired, that's it. No more. People will say, oh, well, they could do it with Checo because he pitted and that, he retired in the pits rather than on track. But it doesn't matter. Like, just close it down, make sure it doesn't happen again. And if they give Checo a penalty, then fine. But I don't think they will because the penalty had been served. I don't think they have grounds in which they can do that.
I mean, for a starter for 10, Baxty, how about the stewards know the rules more than, or are more acquainted to them and can apply them better than bloody Jonathan Wheatley at Red Bull, man? That would be a starter for 10.
Well, it's why you need permanent stewards and not temporary ones. Professional stewards.
We'll hold on to that thought, Baxter. We'll solve for their issues because I've got thoughts on that. Shez, talk to me about this Checo Perez penalty nonsense and Jonathan Wheatley's counsel. Like, what? It feels a bit like cart before horse, a little bit.
Yeah, it's the usual situation that you get with anything involving a Red Bull penalty, which is that Red Bull seem to be dictating the narrative, and they always seem to put the stewards in a slightly awkward position. I have to say, watching it, I actually didn't have a major problem with it. It was if you think you can get the car back out again and do a limited test session, fine. You can do that. It seems silly, but Red Bull were putting themselves. The stewards, were putting Red Bull in that silly situation by not offering them clarity about whether or not they could do that or not. Just be clear. Yes, you can. No, you can't. And I think that's the recurring theme here. That, as you say, you have a different rotating cast of stewards that don't always know the rule book, and in fact certainly don't know the rule book better than the competitors often. And it's the tail that's wagging the dog.
I can't believe we're sat here having this same conversation. And ironically, wasn't it at the same track last year when Jonathan Wheatley combed through the rules and advised them that they would do more points, or that Max Verstappen was owed more points? Was it Suzuka?
So that situation has kind of been, over the course of the last year, has been completely misinterpreted, because it was Johnny Herbert who said, "You're world champion," and Red Bull were like, "No, what?" Everyone worked, even Red Bull, everyone worked on the assumption it was half points. The only people who knew it was a 4-point race were F1 TV. Really? And so,
I thought
so Wheatley was looking through, going, that doesn't look right. It wasn't him going.
Oh, that suggested.
Yeah, it wasn't him that suggested it. No, that came directly from the FIA. The FIA, by their rule book, were right on that day, and then you're just like, yeah, Red Bull were confused. They were like, what? No. So yeah, Wheatley looking at the thing, he was double checking it, going, I don't think so, because Max then of course went into the cool down room and was like told by somebody, you're not the champion, even though he'd already been told he was. And then there was that whole comical thing where he's like, am I the champion? Am I not? Do I get to sit in this big chair? So
yeah, it's gone too far now, Baxter. I'll be honest with you. That all faith and trust has been eroded in the FIA, and I just think they need to go away and sort this out. Because right now it doesn't matter, right? It's not of consequence. Next year, hopefully, fingers crossed and touch wood, when Mercedes and Ferrari have sorted out their act and we get a nice, close, competitive championship from start to finish, these decisions are going to matter again, and we're going to end up in a similar set of circumstance to what we had in 2021, and somebody's going to make a dodgy call or a call that they don't know, or have to revise something or come back and look at it after the fact, and it's going to affect the direction in which a championship will go, and that's not acceptable, lads. Can't have it. I would suggest to the FIA, if you're watching, because I know that they would watch, how could they not watch such a brilliant podcast as the Shakedown? I would suggest two things. First one, Baxty's mentioned already. You need to have... This for me isn't the most important of the solves, but it would be a nice to have if you had some consistency in stewarding, not necessarily in the application of the rules, but in terms of the personnel that you have at each Grand Prix, race to race. The joke is, I don't even know if you need for them to be race to race. It's the imagery is good and the optics are brilliant, but I don't know in this day and age why you can't have virtual stewards and get them the information that they need wherever they are in the world. That's the first thing. Second thing, and I think this is more important, more stewards in the steward room. Chaps, and Karen Trandert's done a brilliant piece where he shows you the mechanics. There's about 20 to 30 people, all with screens in front of them. They identify the instances or incidents in real time. They then present the information to stewards, 3 of whom are in a separate room. Okay, the Chinese walls are nice and you need to segment the duties, of course, cool. But why are there only 3, chaps? 3? Of course there's going to be anomalies when you have such a small sample size, irrespective of how competent these guys and girls are. When you have such a small sample size, they're still going to get it wrong. They just are. It's too small. You need at least anywhere up from 5, right, to try and normalise for these errors and trend them to 0. I don't see any other way that we're going to get around this. Competence as well would be a nice to have. If the guys that they had in that room had a bit of knowledge and competence and were aware of the most recent institutions of the rules. I don't know, chaps, any other solves for this? I feel like we should be getting a pay packet for solving for the ills of the FIA. Have I missed anything?
Right? But Cam, do you think that more stewards is the way to do it rather than fewer? You don't think it becomes decision by committee?
No. So here's right. So I did a stream and this analogy came to me like a eureka moment overnight. In the UFC, I'm a massive fighting fan, right? And they have, like, the judging has been a massive issue for the longest time, right? They've always had 3 judges and they score them round by round. The other day there was a massive fight and one judge scored 1 round just completely wrong. And ultimately that incorrect scoring changed the way woman X should have won. Woman Y, it was a draw, in fact, a majority draw because this dude made a mistake. In diving, they have 7 judges. And what they do, I'm not a massive diving fan, so correct me if I'm talking out of turn here, Baxty. So 2 scores get read outright. One is objective for the difficulty of the dive. How tough is it to do that? And the second one is subjective. How good was the execution? They have 7 scores amongst the 2. So 7 judges will give 2 scores for each. So let's just take execution. Amongst the 7 judges, the only scores that matter were the 3 median scores. So the 2 either side, so say two people give 1 out of 10 and two people give 10 out of 10. The 10 out of 10s and the 1 out of 10s are the erroneous ones, so they just get binned straight away. It's the 3 median ones that matter. And I don't see, okay, so it's not quite a like for like. It's harder to do it in F1, right? F1 is very shades of grey and whatever, but something similar to that. I don't see why they couldn't institute it if, indeed, they just had more people in the bloody room. And I will say this as well, chaps. Diving it's not analogous to F1. Of course, it's different in the way they score it and the bloody incidences that they're reviewing. But I will say this, chaps. In any walk of life, whether it's me at the bloody school governor meeting or an annual share meeting or the chair of the board, any meeting where you're making decisions of Shez, you can talk to this, right? When you're in like surgery or whatever, like you can't just make a decision by yourself, right? You will clear it with at least one other person sometimes. The point that, before you clarifying that, the point that I'm making, anytime you're making, I feel like in most walks of life, when there are decisions of serious consequence to be made, particularly in a board meeting, right? You will have a chair, an exec director, the CFO, the CEO, a non-exec, like you'll have all these people and they will make the decisions that way, right? Because sometimes you're going to get them wrong. Sometimes you, as a sole trader, sometimes you are going to get them wrong. Tell me I'm talking nonsense here, chaps.
Cam, I take your point, and yes, if we're operating and there's a difficult decision to make, you'll call a friend, you'll call someone in to come and have a look and look over your shoulder. But ultimately, there's still only one captain who ultimately has to make a decision. And I guess my biggest problem with the analogy that you just made is that one is apportioning points, positive. To a particular act, right? Where the other is apportioning punishment or potential punishment for another for an act, something that goes against what the point of that activity is. And I think when it comes to a steward's decision, what I don't want is I don't want it to be a committee decision. I want one person who knows the rules and knows them inside out, knows the precedents. And I think that's important, and that's why the permanent stewards are really important. Is able to make a call that is ironclad. Yes, they can get input from other people. Yes, they can get advice, but I'd still want there to be one captain, one person that goes, this is it, and it doesn't go any further than that. This decision is it, and it needs to be a decision that is steeped in credibility, which it was up until 2019. But there's been a marked difference since the late great Charlie Whiting left us.
Sadly, R.I.P. Charlie. Baxty, talk to me, sir.
Yeah, I mean, the best example I can give you, obviously, I'm an opera singer, and so sometimes when it comes to decisions that are made on stage for a production, you can, the director will give you a decision, but there is sometimes a collaborative process that goes on with that, and you kind of make decisions together about what maybe will work, won't work. I agree completely with what Shez said there. I think permanent stewards would understand everything. I mean, we had the farcical situation at the start of the race weekend where the Singapore stewards turned around and said, yeah, we got the Max Verstappen decision wrong. We got the Logan Sargent decision wrong. They should have been penalised for that. And if you'd had permanent stewards, they would have gone, well, in the past, we've done this. They could have looked to the Charles Leclerc incident from Monaco, which he did get penalised for, and go, well, okay, we can mitigate for the fact that you didn't give him enough warning, but unfortunately, we have set a precedent. So Max, you have to take a penalty, and that's it. And Logan Sargent, you have to take a penalty as well. And I think that what needs to happen is there needs to be a coming together. You get these permanent stewards, they establish a very clear, along with Nils Vittich as well, set a very clear set of guidelines, and they say to the teams, this is how we're going to adjudicate the sport, and you have to be brutal with it. Like the first few races, you've just got to be so unbelievably strict so the teams know, okay, there's no room for pushback on this. When they say that's a track limit violation. That's a track limit violation. When they say that's a penalty for pushing somebody off the track, that's a penalty for pushing somebody off the track for impeding in qualifying. Because right now the teams know they can take the piss because it's a different set of stewards every race, so they can chance their arm.
Oh, Baxty, such Kate. I really don't like this subject topic. I know we talk about it pretty much every episode, but I hate that we need to. It really upsets me because this is the sport that I love, and I feel like they're through their incompetence and or inconsistency, borderline bringing the sport into disrepute. Shez?
But the track limits thing, though, Baxter, you brought that up, and I can't let this go because that was the one time this season where they actually tried to do the right thing, and the drivers were absolutely taking the PISS. And
at Austria, I'm talking generally, of course.
Yeah,
I mean, Max and Lewis clearly went over the line in Monza, and nothing happened. Max got one lap time deleted, but he should have had two.
And again, all of this would be helped by a clear set of rules and then guidelines, right? Like I as I was reviewing the rules just now when I was pulling up Appendix L or whatever, I saw that the safety car regs, the safety car portion of the regs are about 100 pages now, aren't they? Like it's like a proper section. So I think they're to be commended for nailing those. Any and all is gone. That's all lapped cars. So to be commended for that. But I think they need to do a wholesale rewriting of the rules so that they're easy to understand. Again, I would argue that terms and definitions would be a nice to have up front so that when we're talking about an overtake, everybody knows what that means specifically as far as the stewards are concerned. And then the instituting, if you build your house on sand, chaps, it's never going to stay up in a storm, right? So I think that's the first port of call. Rewrite the rules and the regs and have them all clear so that everybody understands, so you don't have Jonathan Wheatley telling you how to do it and what to do it after the race. And then we go with the consistency of stewards and potentially more of them in the room making the decisions with one Bard ultimately as the emperor. Right, chaps? We'll close it there, man. Is there any other business? No. Well, I will close the call. Thank you so much for listening. Shez, listen, mate, I will see you on the other side. Shezinho is emigrating somewhere hot because he's had enough of the cold weather in Blighty and leaving me and Baxty to freeze. You know what's off. Cheers for that, mate. No, but genuinely, bruv, safe travels, and I hope you enjoy
safe travels, mate. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
We will catch you next week in a better location, climate-wise. That has been another episode of the Shakedown for co-host Baxty, for co-host Shez. I've been Cameron F1. Do me a favour, like, comment, subscribe. Same time, same place next week. Between now and then, do us a favour. Look, but never stare. Peace.